Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Andrea Campbell. I am the District 4 Boston City Councilor, also the Boston City Council President. Normally this hearing would be chaired by Councilor Mark Siomo, who unfortunately is out sick today. He chairs the City Council Committee on Ways and Means. I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilor McCarthy, who is the Vice Chair of the Committee on Ways and Means, as well as Councilor Josh Sakam. I want to remind folks that this is a public hearing. It's being recorded and broadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964, and it's being streamed at boston.gov/City Council TV. If you have any cell phones, please turn them off or on silent. At the end of this hearing, we will take public testimony, so if there are folks interested in providing public testimony, they can by signing in and checking the box. Just for budget overview purposes and for the audience who's watching, this is a budget review. It encompasses over 36 hearings over roughly 5 weeks. We strongly encourage residents to come and participate, whether in the chamber, at home, or take a moment to engage in the process of giving testimony, public testimony for the record. You can do this in several ways. Come to one of the hearings and give testimony, or come to a hearing that is specifically dedicated to public testimony on Tuesday, June 5th, anytime from 2 to 6 p.m. We will be here during that time frame to listen to public testimony, and it's a time just for folks to come and provide their insights and thoughts on the budget. Lastly, you can send testimony to the Committee on Ways and Means, either in person by coming to the 5th floor or emailing the committee at ccc.wm@boston.gov. Today's hearing is on the Office of Immigrant Advancement. Its dockets, it will be included in the dockets 0559 through 0563, which is an order for the FY19 operating budget, including annual appropriations for various departments, as well as docket 0564, 0565, which is capital budget appropriations. The budget is included in all of those dockets, but specifically today's hearing is on the Office of Immigrant Advancement. At this time, I will let either Alejandra or the Chief, Marty, introduce yourselves for the record and go in the order in which you would like to present. But before I do that, I want to also acknowledge my colleague, District 7 Councilor Kim Janey. Thank you for being here, Councilor. And I'll let you guys take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. My name is Alejandra Senkieng. I am the Director of the Mayor's Office for Immigrant Advancement. Thank you, Madam President, and councilors for hearing us today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chief of Health and Human Services, Marty Martinez, and the Office of Immigrant Advancement falls within the Health and Human Services Cabinet. So here today to sort of take part and support the work of immigrant advancement that they're doing within the community. So I'm going to take it away.
Thank you. So I was going to quickly go over the highlights of the list of accomplishments, the FY18, and then take any questions. Does that make sense for you? Okay.
Anything else you want to add?
Okay, great. So just overview of the office. We started in around 1998. I came in 2014. And we used to be the Office of New Bostonians and switched to the Office for Immigrant Advancement in 2016, I believe it was, yeah. 2015. And to really with the intent to make sure that immigrants weren't just accessing city services, although that's very important, but also really advancing and we're a key part of the civic life of the city. So a lot of these initiatives that we've undertaken in the past year have been are a result of those strategic planning, and then of course the election of 2016, which you'll see how it's been impacted there. So just some overview. With our Immigrant Advancement Initiative, we have a 3-year fellow on immigrant advancement and empowerment who has been with us. We're actually going, it was originally 3 years, but we're going into our 4th year, whose work was really to look at the office and how we worked within city government and with external partners to really support immigrant advancement. Some of the highlights from the fiscal year 18 include our Municipal Leaders for Immigrant Advancement Summit, where we brought local leaders from across Massachusetts to sign on to Proclamation for Immigrant Advancement. We've also organized an emergency deferred action for childhood arrivals renewal fund. So a lot of the work that we do is in public-private partnership, and this was in response to the end of DACA and people having to renew their DACA ahead of time, meaning it would be more costly for them. To Immigrants with Love, which is our public art campaign. We currently have 3 murals, 2 in East Boston, 1 in Rosendale, hoping to bring one to Mattapan. And this was inspired by a national social media campaign as a way of showing our physically showing our support for immigrant communities. We have our annual Citizenship Day, which has been getting larger and larger each year, which we do in partnership with Project Citizenship. And a key element in our immigrant communities is that sometimes they get taken advantage of by attorneys or notarios, and so this is an opportunity for people to go have their immigration application, naturalization application filled out, reviewed by an attorney. And last year we held it at our Reggie Lewis Center, and hugely successful. And then the large-scale immigration clinics for current TPS holders. As you know, the new president, or he's not so new anymore, but the new administration under President Trump and under Secretary Sessions has really changed a lot of immigration policy. And a lot of this policy does not have to go through Congress, and one of those is the elimination of TPS. And in Boston, we have a large number of TPS holders, predominantly from Haiti and El Salvador, but we also have Honduran, Nicaraguan, Nepali, all of which has been terminated, most of them effective next year, 2019. So in response to that, we have been hosting, in partnership with our community partners, these large-scale immigration clinics, particularly for TPS holders, to screen them to see if they are eligible for any other form of immigration relief. And we have, oftentimes, well, I'd say about 20% of people generally are, but there is definitely, as we move forward into 2019, really have to look at what we will do for those that are not eligible, because the majority will not return to their country of origin. Last week, we hosted a German delegation for the Welcoming Communities Transatlantic Exchange. Boston was chosen out of a number of cities to represent the U.S. In Germany in November, and the German delegation came here last week to learn about best practices in each of the places, and so they had a wonderful time and learned a lot of the immigrant integration work that we do. We are hosting the Cities for Action convening in May, in a couple weeks, actually. And Cities for Action is a national coalition of MOIA offices across the country who have come together to advocate. We came together under the Obama administration in response to the executive orders on DAPA and extended DACA, on how we would support one another and support our constituencies and support the president in that, in those orders. And then with the changes of administrations, it's a more how are we able to combat the negative impacts of the new administration. And so we meet, I would say we meet probably 2 or 3 times a year, and this is the first time we're having a best practices convening because of the need of so many of the items that are coming down the pipeline, including public charge, the citizenship question on the census. And so we are hosting them May 22nd for an all-day convening. Our immigrant information corners, which are in every single Boston Public Library, 3 BCYF centers, and 2 YMCA sites. And this is information, people can get information on anything from lawyer referrals to getting citizenship. And we have about over 29,000 copies of resource materials have been distributed through those corners. We're critical in creating the Greater Boston Immigrant Legal Defense Fund. This also was a public-private partnership in that the funds are all privately donated funds, but Boston played a big role in both leveraging those funds as well as in the organization of the fund. Our We Are Boston Gala in 2017, which is our annual fundraiser in order to be able to support immigrant-led organizations in the community, again, was successful, and we had about 900 people, and we celebrated as a night of celebrating immigrants. And the funds that were raised, we were able to then, through a competitive RFP process, grant them out to make mini grants to 10 organizations. And this year, we focused on those who are hosting legal screening clinics for immigrants at risk of losing their status, provide support and referral services for evacuees from Hurricane Maria and Irma, and organize family preparedness workshops, information sessions for individuals and families when they encounter ICE. One thing that we've seen is a huge increase in the number of non-criminals being detained by ICE, and the impact that is having on families and communities is huge. And sadly, one of the things we do have to do is prepare families to make sure they have all their affairs in order in the event that they get picked up and their children are left here. So we're able to give $100,000 to 10 organizations who are doing that work. We continue to have our pro bono immigration clinics. If anyone's been to the 8th floor on the first or third Wednesday between 12 and 2, you might see a whole lot of people sitting, waiting, and they are waiting to be seen by one of our volunteer attorneys. We have seen a marked increase in the number of people who have come to the clinics since the 2016 election. We also have played a critical role in the support of and the response and assistance for Puerto Rican evacuees. Although Puerto Ricans are technically not immigrants, the office has always had a very close relationship with the Puerto Rican community, and although not immigrants, Puerto Ricans face many of the same challenges that our immigrant communities face in terms of language, cultural adaptation, and so forth. And so our office has played a role in making sure that these evacuees are supported, and we have helped lead a coordination effort between the city, the state, and nonprofits to make sure that they are getting the resources that they need. And then lastly, Know Your Rights and immigrant rights workshops. So these are sort of the first line of defense for our immigrant communities to know what they should do should they be encountered by ICE. Again, this is in collaboration with our legal service provider partners, and we have done close to 60 workshops thus far and have presented to more than 1,000 people. So that is our sort of a snapshot of our office in fiscal year 2018. For fiscal year 2019, continue a lot of the work that we've been doing. We expect even more increased enforcement with ICE. We expect the need for more clinics and Know Your Rights workshops, and so continue that work. Some of the new things that we're working on is we're working with Office of Workforce Development to co-publish a report on how immigrants are the backbone of Boston's labor force and how federal policies can impact the future talent pool. And working with BPH, Boston Public Health Commission, to address the stress and trauma of immigrants from fears of national immigration policies and climate. We want to continue our work with the Municipal Leaders Summit, the Greater Boston Legal Defense Fund, and the Welcoming Communities Transatlantic Exchange. So that's sort of an overview of what we've done this past year and what we plan to do in the coming year. And I don't know if Chief Martinez wanted to.
Go right ahead.
Can I just add
Yes.
something, Councilor? I think one of the things that the councilors will have seen is that in sort of the highlights of the good work of the office, there's both the need and desire to work provide programs and services to populations and communities who need it, but also there's a need to to have the advocacy and visibility necessary to advance the community. So as Alejandra mentioned, it's sort of that balance, right? When federal policy changes or government changes on the national level, we must respond to crisis that some of the communities are in. But at the same time, the office is keeping its eyes on how do we ensure the community can advance, and how do we ensure the communities, we're doing what we can do around the thriving aspect of what we want to do to support the community. So the team, Alejandra and her team, are doing a great job of trying to balance both those things, which are competing demands. If you're always dealing with crisis, you don't get time to do the other thing, and they're working hard to prioritize both those areas. So I just wanted to mention that and kind of the scope of the good work that the office is doing. So, that's it.
No, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
You want to add something?
No, thank you for that, Chief. The national work has become increasingly important, the advocacy on the national scale. So the best practices convening, but that we have weekly calls with Cities for Action to talk about how cities are really are responding to federal actions, in that we don't have really, there's not much we can do in terms of the policy front, given that immigration policy is a federal matter, but we talk about what we can do on the defense, and hopefully on the offense. One thing that we have been excited to see is that more often than not, when a court case is brought to challenge what we see as an unjust policy, we are generally, immigrant advocates, cities generally are successful in those legal outcomes. So we think, as tough as the climate is, we believe we have the law on our side, and we are on the right side of history, so it keeps us going.
Thank you both. I do want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilor Asabi George. Just a couple of questions before I allow my colleagues to ask questions, and I may come back for a second round. Sure. But quickly, the report that you mentioned, working with the Office of Workforce Development,
yeah.
When are you expecting that to be released? Because I think that's
September.
Excellent. September.
Yeah. There will be a pre-report in June.
Yep.
Right? In
Yep,
June, there will be a release of a report that's just data, and then this will be a follow-up report. We have contracted with Dr. James Jennings, who's working with us on that report.
No, that's awesome. And I will add, before I sort of ask my questions, I'm so happy, Chief, that you brought up the importance of striking a balance between being reactive and proactive. I know we've been having conversations with your office related to the hearing order I filed about how do we work on policy change or practice change right here in the city of Boston, things we do have control over that allow folks to feel more included in the city, to reap more benefits. And I think all of that is frankly from a proactive space, and hopefully will offer a glimmer of hope versus just simply saying we're going to stand with you. What does that look like? Right. So thank you for your leadership, and look forward to working groups and diving into that. Yeah. Just if you could explain, just how the nature of the work within your office has shifted, the workload responsibilities, given what's happening at the national context. Sure. I think we all hear about it, but I think we don't really know in detail what has that meant for you, your team, your employees. Right. If you could talk through that.
Sure, absolutely. And
before that, I just want to quickly acknowledge we've been joined by Councilor Matt O'Malley and Councilor Ed Flynn. Great,
thank you. So as we all know, throughout the 2016 election cycle, the anti-immigrant rhetoric was very strong, and to say the least, and the current president ran on a lot of what we refer to as hate speech against our immigrant communities. But beyond that, those of us who do the work also knew that unfortunately that speech could very quickly be turned into action upon election, because many of the policies, the executive orders, all of that work can be easily undone. The regulatory changes do not have to go through Congress. So we knew that it wasn't just, the rhetoric was scary, and the rhetoric was was bad, but we knew that upon election that rhetoric would actually be able to turn into pretty rapid action. So I would say, the work of our office, we continued, to do the work that we were doing prior to that, but there was definitely a marked increase in the number of constituents that we had to work with. The attendance at our clinics skyrocketed. Working with other city agencies has always been a priority. This has taken even more of a priority to be able to help distill the information that's coming out of Washington and explain it, and also help, for example, Boston Public Schools, what is the best way that they're going to work with their immigrant students, protect their immigrant families. So the workload just increased significantly for me and for my staff in particular. The constant need to be very on top of national policy always was obviously important, but it seems there are times where it seems like something is coming out of Washington on a daily or weekly basis that sometimes we have to react to, or sometimes we just have to wait and think about, well, how can we proactively engage the community prior to the rollout of these policies. So there's just been a very marked increase in the workload. I think that, I have to say one of the positive things has been just the outpouring of support from the communities and from people who just want to help. I feel like we've had a huge increase. We've always worked very close with community partners, and just the nature of having to do so much more work has made it so that we have to work even more closely, and that has, for me, has been a very positive experience. Even though it has included, it might include more work, but I feel like we really, for the size of our office, that we're able to, our output is very, very strong, and that's multiplied because of the work of the nonprofits that we work with in the community and their ability to really touch people on the ground.
No, thank you for that. It's very helpful. Speaking of sort of your number of employees, I saw that there was a decrease in your permanent employees line item between fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19. Can you explain the decrease and why there's a 9,071 decline?
Sure. So as I mentioned, as part of our Immigrant Integration and Empowerment Project, we were able to bring on a fellow for 3 years who working with the Office on Immigrant Integration and Empowerment. It was originally going to be more of like a public process, but at the time, a lot of public processes were happening, like Imagine Boston, Go Boston 2030, Climate Ready, and we thought instead of having a whole separate process for immigrants, immigrant integration, why don't we make immigrant integration a part of all of these processes, which served to be make a lot more sense. And then also, how were we working within City Hall to build capacity in offices across the city, so they also were working we thought more efficiently, more effectively with our immigrant communities. And then she also led our strategic planning and our rebranding initiative. And so we were able to take on this fellow through the generosity of a grant by the Bar Foundation. And the Bar Foundation, what they did is granted her salary for 2.5 years and asked that the city of Boston cover half of her salary in the final year. So what you'll see from the fiscal year, fiscal year 18, there was $30,000 in that budget to pay for half of her salary, and then in this year, because she's ending her we don't have that position. We don't have that position anymore. She's not considered an FTE, which is why she's not. It's not reflected in the FTEs.
That was my other. Okay.
Yeah. So because her position is ending, then that is a discrepancy. The reason why it's not a $30,000 discrepancy is just changes in collective bargaining, right, and some
Step-ups in the
Mm-hmm.
salary.
and stuff. Yeah.
Speaking of, so that might explain when you have your 5-year analysis of your full-time employees, there are 5 when you look at the breakdown by ethnicity and gender, and then there is 6.
Yeah.
Is that what?
That's that discrepancy. That's that difference between those two. So we have, I currently have 5 FTEs on budget, but I also have this one person.
Who's leaving?
Who's leaving, who's full-time 6th person, who's included, I believe the Office of Diversity includes, is it the Office of Diversity that includes everyone?
What was she getting paid through the grant?
Except for her final year,
Yeah.
she was paid, the Bar Foundation wanted the city to pay for half of her
But
salary.
in the first year, she was paid what salary? What was her salary?
The 70,000.
Oh, okay, and then there was a split between the city and the
Yeah,
bar.
yeah. So for 2 years, she was paid through the grant. And I was actually able to extend it a little bit, so.
Is someone inheriting her responsibilities? Like one of the members on your team now? And then a follow-up is, given the increased workload that you guys have, I mean, we hear about it just through constituent service calls, and we're saying, call you guys.
We know.
What,
Thank you.
do you have an adequate amount of employees to do the work? And if not, what does that sort of look like, given the drastic increase that you guys, in terms of the workload that you're dealing with?
Yeah.
And also, you can't anticipate what's going to come out of Washington, which
Right.
makes it, all hands on deck, reactive in nature, probably, late night phone calls, planning for the next day and how we talk to community about this.
Right.
So what are your limitations right now in the work, given the increased workload? And it may not just be from an employee, full-time employee standpoint, it might be some others that I'm not thinking about.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to go allow colleagues to say a couple words.
So I think, definitely her duties are, some of them will be absorbed by the current staff. I think all small departments, I would say, probably would love to have more staff. Probably big departments too, as well. Everyone could use more staff. I think with the increased workload and the possibility of not replacing that position, then we will make some decisions about what we need to prioritize, and it will probably be a challenge.
If I could,
Yeah, go ahead,
Councilor,
Chief.
I think one of the things that we'll be doing is looking at, sort of the full breadth of all the work that exists in the team, and the pieces that person may have been working on that may shift. But we're also going to work at the cabinet level with the department, and also with budget moving forward, to sort of make sure we can identify, if we have to identify some of the resources, if we need to look for more private funding. I mean, we need to make sure we have the capacity to do the work, obviously, because the trade-off means that we don't do the services that we need to be doing. So we're actively engaged in the conversation now, and I think, again, I think it's about probably being more strategic about what gets done, and what might end up being something we do in 6 months as opposed to something we do today. And so that's sort of the framing that I think we're in conversation to think about where that leads.
Okay. I mean, I know just in conversations with foundations about the possibility of funding things in the council side of things, they're always talking about sustainability, right? And looking at, if someone's doing an incredible job in a position, how can the city extend that permanently? And so I'm thinking about that too, but at least the discrepancies I now understand. I'm going to call on Councilor Josh Sakam.
Thank you, Madam President. Good afternoon. Thank you all for the work you're doing every day. I know it's, I think it's never an easy role, the role you fill, but obviously these past so only 18 months, but have been particularly trying. And I know the people in Boston and in Greater Boston, I think, really depend on the work you're doing and the work the city is doing for, I guess, maybe some symbolic comfort, if nothing else, given that we have a heavy mountain to climb when it comes to some of the federal immigration issues. But I have one specific question, because I think you gave a great overview, and I can see every day the good work you're doing. We have a federal census coming up in 2020. Clearly, President Trump is attempting to undercount, discount, whatever you want to call it, our immigrants, whether they're citizens, whether they're documented, undocumented, whatever it is. And our Attorney General, Maura Healey, has filed a lawsuit along with many others on that front. What's being done? Because I know there are a lot of groups, nonprofit groups as well, in the Boston area who are trying to mobilize for a campaign. Are you involved in that? Have you had discussions?
Yeah, absolutely. So the citizenship question being added to the census was something that we were against, and we had the mayor signed on to a letter asking that it not be added. And like you said, we see it as a deliberate attempt to undercount not just immigrants, but also communities of color across the country. I happened to, in my previous role, led redistricting for the state in 2011. It was a partnership between OISE, where I worked at the time, Mass Vote, and Common Cause. So I know a lot about the census, and I know a lot about redistricting, and understand that the only way that we lost one seat instead of 2 congressional seats is because of the growth in the immigrant population, in particular the Latino and Asian population in Massachusetts. And so in seeing that, you know, and in redistricting, it worked out because we had a congressman who decided to retire, but had that not happened, one, we would have had a fight between a campaign between 2 incumbents, and it also, as you all know, we lose funding as well as power in Washington when we have less delegates. And so, we understood and so the administration is very clear that this addition of the citizenship question, as well as a marked decrease in funding for the census, and lack of preparedness on behalf of the federal government to prepare for the 2020 census is going to lead in undercuts. So there is someone, I know that there is a position that is budgeted, I believe, in, is it IG? Is it IGR?
Yeah, I think it's an IGR.
IGR, that will lead that, and our office will be very involved because of just the direct impact that it will have on the immigrant community. And I was recently contacted by the new coordinator for, I think it's a Census Equity Fund. It's a coalition of funders who are already starting to think, how are we going to address this? So, yes, we've been involved on the city level, and then also, and then our convening that we're having on the 22nd, the cities taking action convening, we will have a whole section on the census.
That's good to hear. Thank you. I think, I mean, even in ideal circumstances, I think immigrant populations and younger populations, like we often have in Massachusetts, are undercounted. You know, even in 2010, which I'm sure, you know, given your prior work, you're aware of. So it's doubly important, both from, you said, congressional representation and billions of dollars in federal funding. Obviously, it makes it difficult with a hostile president. But thank you for that. Obviously, I think this body, myself individually, want to be as helpful, certainly with outreach into all our communities. And I think, you know, certainly, I think it's immigrants who have been targeted by this president, but there are a lot of hard-to-count populations. The students that are here that you know, should be counted, that we need from the funding and the congressional and electoral vote representation. So, so thank you for that. I look forward to working with it, and keep up the good work. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilor Zakim. Councilor Flynn?
Thank you, Madam President. I represent the South End and have a high concentration of Puerto Rican in the South End, especially in Villa Victoria. Can you tell me what type of services the city has for the recently arrived Puerto Ricans as a result of the devastation to Puerto Rico? I know some of them have been enrolled in public schools, but what services are you providing?
Yeah, so the public schools is definitely one key area of entry where students are receiving services. The challenge, as you probably know, is in terms of housing, and that many are housed in hotels that are outside of Boston, but then still have a connection to Boston through the Boston Public Schools. So a lot of the services are rendered through the family resource centers and through some of the nonprofits like Sociedad Latina and IBA, as you know. What we noticed what the administration noticed was that there was a lot of work going on in different places, but there wasn't a whole lot of coordination. And then housing being a huge concern, Sheila Dillon and her shop has taken a lead role in making sure that those coordinating efforts are happening. And so we've taken on a model where every 2 weeks we come together, the city, the state, the nonprofits, the job training services. We come together and we go case by case of all of the families that are in the greater Boston area, and we do an analysis. Where are they? What do they need? And making sure that, okay, this person, for example, we have people who have found jobs but don't have the money, obviously, for a down payment, or don't have the credit history, and so Sheila's shop or her counterpart at the state, whether it be Metro Housing, can have programs like the home base program, where they're able to provide that down payment, that first and the first payment, are helping with jobs. We also have people who were professionals in Puerto Rico and need certification help. And so we work with JVS to make sure that they're able, through their workforce development programs, are able to help recertify Puerto Ricans who have relocated here. So because it's more manageable in this area, when you talk Holyoke and Springfield, they have a huge number, much larger number than we have of evacuees, and also less resources, to be honest, than greater Boston in terms of our nonprofits and so forth. So the approach that we've taken, because we're able to do it, is to meet biweekly and go case by case by case, and meet the needs on a case by case basis. Yeah, and I know, actually, I'm sorry, the VIA actually was able to open open their waiting list, and have actually been able to house, I think, 2 or 3 families,
Okay.
Which, as you know, in our tight housing market, is actually pretty significant.
Right. And you were talking earlier about, maybe I missed the number, the staff you have, is it 6 or 7?
I have 6, currently, but that includes a grant, half grant. It's like a half grant position. Technically 5, but I have 6 working in my office right now.
Okay, and that person that is working with you because of the grant, that person is leaving?
The funding is ending in November, yes.
What type of skills did that person have? Were they able to speak in different languages? What language would it be?
Sure, yeah. So all of my staff are bilingual, 4 in Spanish, 1 in Vietnamese, and 1 in Chinese, Cantonese. And so she is one of our bilingual staff, and she worked very closely with departments on their immigrant integration work. She's sort of my right-hand person in working with the Boston Public Schools, in trying to figure out how we best serve immigrant students.
It would be a shame to, because of a private company that's not funding this job, to lose such a dedicated person. This city's booming. There's all kinds of money in the city budget. can we find money for this dedicated person that let this person continue the great work they're doing? It's a $70,000 salary. That's not a lot of money. And, you know, what you get for that salary is a lot of dedicated service, helping poor people, helping immigrants. Boston's an immigrant city. I'd rather spend an extra $70,000 and give this person the opportunity to be a full-time employee for the city. I'd hate to see someone like that if they're qualified and they're working well. Let's give them an opportunity to work for the city.
Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, I think it's trying to figure out how we ensure that the work gets done, and that's what I think Alejandro is trying to envision. But I totally understand what you're articulating, and our desire is to keep the services growing and expanding, and so that's why I think we're going to try to figure out where that capacity lives to make sure we don't lose any capacity. So.
Yeah, I mean, if there's anything I can do to help navigate anything, I'd rather see that person as a full-time employee and continue working hard for the city and for the people of Boston. We need people like that in the city. We don't need them unemployed. We need them doing exactly what they're doing.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I guess my final question is, I was living in Cuba during the Haiti earthquake, and I was 90 miles off of Port-au-Prince when that earthquake hit, and I saw the devastation of that country after I was part of the relief effort. But what are we doing to help our Haitian community in Boston that were devastated by the earthquake in that country? Are they getting the services and care and assistance here in Boston? And what can the city council do to be more helpful to our Haitian community?
Yeah. So yeah, our Haitian, as you know, our Haitian community is the third largest foreign-born community in Boston. And we have a number of TPS holders, temporary protected status holders. And as you probably know, the administration has ended that program for Haitians, Nicaraguans, El Salvadorians. And so there's a few key areas. One is through our mini grants and through our community partnerships, we're able to fund organizations like the Independent Family Services Institute, which is a Haitian-led, Haitian-serving organization. Another thing is to look at that population of TPS holders and what they're going to do once they're no longer have work authorization, because that is what is at risk. Part of that is partnering with different industries. I think one key area is the healthcare industry is going to be devastated by the number of home health aides that are Haitian and TPS holders is rather significant. I think I know something that we will definitely try to do, and I think a great role for the city council would be what industries are we working with to figure out what are going to be the alternatives for this industry. They're not going to be able to replace all those workers. As you know, it's hard work. It's not the best paid work, but our Haitian brothers and sisters are taking on a significant portion of that work. We're doing immigration clinics, so working with Haitians to come. Haitians who are TPS holders to come, and we actually have one this Saturday in Mattapan at the what's it called? Where is it? The Mildred Community Center at the BCYF Center, and so one thing that we could do is perhaps be more proactive in sending you guys that information when we're having those clinics, so that you can help spread the word as well, because that is a key way that people are going to be able to stay. I think you're absolutely right. The devastation on the island has not been repaired. As you know, it is significant, continues to be significant, and many of these people will not return home. And so the question is, what methods are we implementing so that what people who currently have status who are going to be out of status within a year, within 2 years, how we're going to combat that.
No, thank you for taking my question, and if I can be of any help to your office, please let me know.
Thank you. Thank you, Counselor. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you both for being here. Can you talk a little bit more about the families that came from Puerto Rico that are housed outside of the city in the hotels, motels?
Yep.
And then coming to school in Boston?
Yep. Yeah, so definitely BPS would probably know a little bit better than I do, but I know from the work that we've been doing in the coalition. So, you know, the way that the hotels work is that hotels have to sign on to accept a FEMA rate, and so hotels in Boston do not accept a FEMA rate, which is significantly lower than what they charge. And then hotels are also concerned that if permanent housing is not found, then we come into a season that is a high season, you know, that they then have to evict families. And so
they're paying the FEMA rate as opposed to the state covering the cost of that hotel through the homeless?
So the FEMA will pay unless you might see every once in a while you hear reports that FEMA's benefits are ending, right? And that is actually a review of everyone who's receiving FEMA and seeing if their home in Puerto Rico is habitable, and if it is, FEMA will discontinue. But the state has made a commitment through the Red Cross to continue those funds so that people aren't put on the street. Okay. So the state would rather, obviously, that FEMA take on that responsibility. And
then what about the cost of transporting those children into Boston? Because I'm kind of curious, when a student that lives in Boston is experiencing homelessness and has to be sheltered outside of the city, through federal law, through McKinney-Vento, we cover that expense. I'm curious as to why we're educating that child in Boston. It's not that, and I don't want the message to be, I don't want this kid educated in the city. But why, one of the greatest challenges for our students who are experiencing homelessness is the time and transportation.
Right.
Why aren't we looking at support from the school district where the hotel is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So,
and then who's covering the cost of transporting that child to school back and forth every day?
Okay. In terms of the cost, I will have to get back to you on that. I believe it's BPS, but don't hold me on that because I don't know. So the way that it worked is that when people first came, they were being processed at one of the family resource centers. So if you were processed at Sociedad Latina or you were processed through the Home for Little Wanderers, which was one of the family resource centers, and you were staying in Boston, whether it be temporarily, and you enrolled your students in school, then that became their school placement. And so if, your temporary housing expired or you had, didn't have housing, then you were moved to a hotel. The responsibility, because just the same way with homeless families, because the students were enrolled in Boston Public Schools, they were given the right to continue to be in Boston Public Schools. I think the challenges, as you've mentioned, one of the reasons, and there are many people in hotels in Braintree and Dedham that are enrolled in those public school districts. I think for some of them, if their students were already enrolled in a district and they weren't sure where they were going to end up because the housing is temporary, they didn't want to take their kids out of Boston, put them into Braintree, and then have to put them, just an example, just put them somewhere else. So I think they were waiting until they had a longer term housing solution before transferring the students. It is a challenge because if you were processed in Boston, but you're living in Braintree, a lot, the resources and the ability to check in is limited. The Family Resource Center does travel to each of those places. Sociedad Latina has a caseworker who is traveling. Sociedad has decided that instead of having a physical center in Boston where they would receive, families understanding the challenge of transportation, they have decided to have their caseworker be mobile. And so I think it's more of people didn't want to shift schools too many times. There are, if you were processed and immediately put in Quincy, or you were processed put in Braintree and processed through the Quincy Family Resource Center, you do have a number of students who are in the Braintree, and I know more about Braintree because there's more families there because there's 2 hotels, but in the Dedham, in Dedham as well.
Great. I just, I certainly hope, I guess I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
That we're able to access some federal resources to cover that expense, because I know for our students prior to the challenges with Puerto Rico, prior to that, it was a tremendous expense to transport those kids, and we're constantly, trying to get our kids that are sheltered outside of the city back into Boston.
Yeah.
And this, it's done at a great expense and often at great travel times, which is not really fabulous for our young people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hope that the feds are giving us some resources, both to cover the great expense of transporting our kids in and out every day, but also some resources for creating and finding and or creating and supporting the assets needed to find more permanent housing.
Yeah, I can definitely work with the state and with our own our office, Renee Fielding here, to find out what other benefits aside from FEMA, or if those FEMA benefits include anything outside of housing. I can definitely get that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can definitely get that information.
Right, because it becomes a great burden on the school district.
Yeah.
And the.
Yeah, and
Sure.
I do know
Funds
that the governor has given additional funding to school districts that have taken a considerable amount of students. I don't know if there's been support for things such as transportation costs for districts who have less. I believe they're about 100. I will get the number for you, but 130 students, evacuees in the Boston Public Schools. But don't hold me to that. I will get that number for you.
Great, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Sabi George. I just have just a couple of follow-ups. Most of my questions have been asked, including some line of questioning by Councilor Flynn. The reason we even wanted to hold this budget hearing was, frankly, given what's coming out of Washington, given what's happening, even in response to what's coming out of Washington in our neighborhoods. There are folks who are, the ugliness is starting to show in some of our neighborhoods, and interactions between residents who identify as immigrants and those who don't. So I was actually surprised to see a decline in your overall budget, given all of what you were dealing with, including the increased workload. And then to see the 6 and 5 employees, that now makes sense. I didn't understand why there were different numbers in different places for full-time employees. But I agree with Councilor Flynn. I think we need to find the resources. I don't think your department staff should be going down. If anything, it should probably be going up. I know, just given the number of calls or inquiries from my office to your office. So I would love to continue the conversation before we finalize the budget about how you could retain the person who is leaving or keep that position open for someone else to join who has, language capabilities and a compassion for this work, because I'm sure you need it in this time, that we're dealing with. So I just wanted to echo Councilor Flynn's points on that. But lastly, if there are other things you want to address or say, feel free, and then we'll probably wrap up.
I think that I appreciate the hearing. I appreciate the questions, and I know we work closely with your offices sometimes on sort of specific manners, but any way that we can maintain a closer relationship and a way to make sure that you all are getting the resources and the information about our programs. You know, the one in Mattapan, I don't even know if you knew that was happening. Oh, you did? Okay, good.
We typically have other folks who may
So
be sitting around, but
sometimes, you
I don't
know-
know that it's consistent.
Okay.
We- so
Yeah,
that's a
but
great
any,
point.
you know, consistent way that we can maintain, informed and, because we are all serving the same constituents, then that would be great.
Well, thank you for the work that you are doing. If no one else has anything else to add, this hearing is adjourned.
Great, thank you.